If you have an interest in horses and love learning more about horses, the horse industry, teaching, or even managing your own horse business, then you're in the right place. We would love you to join us on our mission, which is to improve the lives of horses around the world through the education of riders, handlers, and trainers. So get comfortable, listen in, and enjoy.
Hi everyone, today on Horse Chats we've got Will Faerber. He's come before, certainly he's talked to us before about dressage, developing dressage through classical foundation training. We're going to talk to him today about the World Dressage Federation, why it was set up, what the plans are, and a little bit more in depth. But before I do that, I'd just like to remind you about International Horse College. The podcast is brought to you by International Horse College, and the vision of International Horse College is to have a world where people safely appreciate, respect and enjoy their horses, and the horses appreciate, respect and enjoy their people. Have a look now at the wide variety of horse-friendly courses at internationalhorsecollege.com, registered training organisation 31352. Now we'll go back to Will. How are you today, Will?
I'm doing very well indeed, and I must say that your ideas there are exactly what we have in mind and what we're trying to do,
Yes.
to bring back some sanity to the horse business.
Yeah, complement each other very well.
Yep.
Now, Will, tell us, you sort of think World Dressage Federation, do we need another Dressage Federation? I know you've got the United States Dressage Federation, we've got Dressage Australia. Why do we need another Dressage Federation in addition to what we've already got?
Well, really, it's to give people the opportunity. Now, I won't speak for Australia and what's happened in Australia because I'm not that familiar with it. I am familiar with the trends all over the world with the FEI. We've seen, basically, what we've seen in America is our organization, which is now called the United States Equestrian Team, I think they call themselves. They used to be called the American Horse Show Association. And we have the USDF. Now, a lot of people don't realize the history of that. The USDF was a total separate entity to the American Horse Show Association and was started by a man named Lowell Boomer back, I'm not sure exactly when, I would say late 60s, early 70s at the latest. And he ran it with very much classical ideas in mind and the correct, education in dressage and the correct attitude towards the horses and this sort of thing. And unfortunately, after his death, I'm not sure at what point it got turned over and became part of the American, or a wing of the American Horse Shows Association. And that's when everything really began to go downhill in terms of what we saw, in the dressage ring. And I know I'm not the only one who feels this way about dressage, but we've seen dressage, in the last 20 years especially, and this started about 30 years ago. We saw this downward spiral of what was expected of horses, because for years I started riding dressage, in the mid 60s probably, and showed competitively for 40 years, something like that, and students. And what we saw was this sort of general decline in what was accepted. Because we saw for many years, from my first 20 years in the dressage world and in the USDF, you would go to a horse show and there would be, a lot of people in training level and first level and second level. Unfortunately, in the test, they started calling for a collected trot at second level, and at least in the USDF. I don't know what they, that's why I'm speaking for
Sure.
us. But I think similar things have happened elsewhere. But my experience has been with them. So we saw this decline. No one was getting past second level. I mean, for 20 years, I was a dressage trainer, and we saw how, there would be hundreds of people in these lower level classes, and no one could get beyond second level. For the first thing, they should have never been requiring, like 3-day event, don't call it a collected trot at a level like second level. They call it a working trot. And so it became very confusing as to what collection was. So no one was ever really quite achieving it. Of course, nobody had super horses in those days. They had, the best of dressage horses when I started were still Lipizzaners and things like that. The German warm bloods were mostly very heavy, sort of jug-headed horses that, were kind of unpleasant to ride back in those days. I mean, they were big and strong and powerful, but they had little elegance, and people could get away with kind of riding them in the way that they did in many cases, which was very forcefully. But we saw this move away going all the way back to the 50s. People don't realize that our two greatest lights in dressage of the 20th century were Egon von Neindorf in Germany and Nuno Oliveira in Portugal. And they were both very similar in how they approached things in their early days. Now, Nuno became very confusing later on because he just sort of stopped really training and collecting money from people. I love the man, but people need to know the truth that, there was the Nuno Oliveira of his heyday, and then there was the Nuno Oliveira that after he actually was retired and came out of retirement only because he needed to make money. And what we saw after then, we saw a lot of people coming out of him. I studied with him for over a 5-year period, and really over about a 10-year period in all from the time I first started going to his clinics here in the United States. But anyway, my point is that no one was getting past second level. And then all of a sudden, everything started to decline. All of a sudden, what we needed became less. And all of a sudden, we had these super dressage horses, super movers, as you call them. So what we saw in dressage was this move. I mean, to me, dressage today is a breed show. It's a breed show for a particular type of European warm blood horses that move in this extravagant kind of manner. And if you don't have one of those, that's what's being judged more often today than not, rather than what they're actually doing. 30 years ago in America, if you rode into the ring with a horse behind the bit or forced against your hand, the judges you'd end up with a 20%. You'd be laughed out of the ring if you would. Today, we have horses going to the Olympic Games scoring 90% that are completely hollow, forced against the hand. Some of them even look lame. In the last couple of Olympics, I was amazed at how many lame horses I saw. And no one's, including the one that won. And all this was just being looked aside because it was what they wanted to win. So this is what we want to get to with the World Dressage Federation, is a whole new federation where we get back to this being about the training and about the relationship between the riders and the trainers. When I started in dressage, dressage trainers rarely had horses in training where they rode them for people. When I started dressage was about the people who were really interested in studying deeper. We thought of, dressage as being, a much more intellectual and something that you really had to study, like the difference in playing guitar. I think you noted before that I'm a musician. Well, there's lots of musicians who've made millions of dollars who can only play 3 chords out of tune, but if you look at many horses today, to me, it sounds out of tune. I look at them and the horses are out of tune. They're overflexed in the neck. They're throwing their front legs out. The hind legs are trailing behind them someplace. And all these things are being scored massively high as long as you have one of those super mover horses. So getting back to the collection, what happened? So no one was getting past second level. So then all of a sudden we had these super mover horses that started coming in. They've always been expensive. There's always some wealthy person that started buying these things. First it was $50,000, then $100,000. As you know, now dressage horses can sell for millions of dollars, and it became a thing where now we have trainers. For my first 20 years, I never trained horses for people. I trained the trainers to train their own horses. Because most people in dressage wanted to do it themselves. That's what dressage was about, was learning to be a trainer, if you will. That makes sense, So now we started having these barns full of dressage trainers where the trainers ride the horses for the people, and the people rarely get on them in many cases, or get on them. And I went through a little bit of those myself, where I worked for I was a private trainer for about 25 years for very wealthy people. And I walked away from that task because I got tired of just setting these people up, watching them, win ribbons and then ruining their horses, if you will. So, I want to get back to that place where, people really want to learn themselves. I'm not interested that you can hire some trainer to get up and beat up your horse and force it into some phony frame, and then you get on it and hope it holds together long enough to get around the ring, if you will. And that's kind of what we've seen happen, which means that the people who just want to really enjoy their horses and do the best for them, they may not have $1 million mover, but if a horse is sound and capable of being trained, meaning sound enough of sound in body and mind and body, that is, that they can withstand the pressures of training, which shouldn't be that pressurized. That anybody should be able to ride dressage and do well and be able to compete against others who are with that same idea that, it's the horse that is trained the best, that is exhibiting, those qualities that we used to think of in dressage horses. Horses being relaxed, horses moving over their backs, horses flowing and swinging through their backs. Instead of what we are now seeing more and more is horses being pulled into tightened frames, overflexed in the neck, front legs are being thrown out. And of course, just this idea that, if you talk to most people, unfortunately, in most of the so-called show stuff that goes on, and that is also in Western, and happily, we're seeing more Western people getting involved. We're seeing Western dressage and this kind of thing. And some of it's better than not. But, that being that point, that we want to bring this back to something that people can do for themselves on the horses that they have, enjoy them, and be able to compete on a worldwide level without it costing a fortune, if you will. And that's part of the thing that a lot of people don't realize what happened to our sport. In the mid-90s, we had two things that happened. We had, actually that was about 85, the American Horse Show Association for the first time hired a professional CEO to run it, whose only interest was getting more people and more people paying fees. That became their goal. So everything to get more people in, we had to dumb the sport down so that we could have people moving up into the upper levels. As I say, it was not uncommon. My first 20 years in dressage, it was not uncommon to go to a horse show and there would be 2 horses at Grand Prix if there were that many.
So, Will, you're about to launch the World Dressage Federation. What are you doing? How are you going about this launch?
Well, the first thing I have been doing is promoting the idea with all of our people online. My company is called Art to Ride, and we have a very strong following online, Art to Ride, fans and followers as well, which is a site on Facebook. So we have quite a Facebook presence as well as the YouTube channel. And so it's become a very great community of people working together, especially the Art to Ride fans and followers site, which is a site that you actually have to ask to join and answer a few questions that you will be civil if we let you in, things like that. Because it's amazing how many people want to, what do they call them? Trolls. They're just getting on to start commotion with people, to say things they know are going to wind up people. So we have a few questions like that to ask to join that. But we have a very strong following there, thousands of people and 10,000 people or something on that site alone.
So if people want to go to that site, they go to facebook.com. Now it's Art to Ride, so it's ART, the number 2, and then RIDE, if they wanted to search for that on Facebook.
Right. And if they'll find an Art to Ride Facebook site, and that there's also one, there's actually 3 of them. There's one in Australia, there's one in Germany, there's 5 or 6 of them around the world. There's one in South America, there's one in Africa, amazingly enough, England, many other countries. But if you find one that's Art to Ride fans and followers, is the one that I communicate with everybody myself. So that's the one where I'm constantly putting things up and talking to people about. And we also have, within Art to Ride, we have our associate trainer situation. There's 40 associate trainers around the world that I work with who are all part of this and are going through I'm teaching my Art to Ride associate trainers to be judges as well. So I'm taking them all through kind of a judging program. And right now what we're doing is we have written the levels of the World Dressage Federation. It starts with foundation level, and there's 6 foundation level tests, and then we do working level. That means when horses are working over that back, and then we have collection level, which takes us up into Grand Prix, and then we have mastery level, which is of course the FEI levels. So it's broken down that way. I have completed all the tests for the foundation level, and what we're trying to do is create tests that really more mimic how we ride and train, rather than, unfortunately, what happened in some of the tests in the past, which actually, it's not that the tests are bad. The tests are actually pretty good. They're just not being judged correctly. And I was very excited when in the 90s, when they first put all the stretches into the test, which, of course, to someone who understands this work, they put all those stretches into the test to prove the correct training of the horses at these lower levels, to prove that you could still let go of the reins and they'd seek the contact with the bridle, right, instead of just putting their head straight in the air, which is what happens when you fight with horses' mouths. So the tests were pretty good, but they started expecting people to do too many illogical things too soon. Like, you really needed to have almost a horse ready for collection to be able to even go and score in their training level tests. So what I've tried to do with my lower level tests in the foundation level, we actually have tests that are nothing but walking. The first 2 tests are all entirely walking. Then the next two add trotting in, and the final two in that foundation level add cantering in as well. But in a very progressive way, we allow the horses to have more time into the stretches. For instance, where in the older tests, in the USDF test, for instance, they allow one, there's usually one circle in the stretch in each direction, which always have a coefficient of 2, which I agree with they should, because it's what actually proves that the horse is correctly trained and why they put those things into the test. But what happened was, as I said, I was very excited when in the 90s they put all these things. And I thought, well, people are going to actually have to learn how to ride in order to do this. But what we saw was a rejection of this by the trainers. The trainers just telling people, well, when you get to that point, it's not important. Just let go of the reins and kind of, let their neck out a little bit, which is what you emotionally see in horse shows, which is too bad, because once again, as I said, it is that correct stretch, the horse following the contact with the hand, that shows you that the horse is correctly trained. And once again, why they put all those in the test. So once again, we've tried to write tests and are developing tests that more mimic and give horses, especially young horses, the opportunity. For instance, our first two classes, they're only in the walk. So you have an opportunity, and not only are they in the walk, but at the end of your test, you actually dismount in the ring and stand there with the horse and then lead it out of the ring. So horses can go and begin to have a good experience rather than what we so often see in the show world today. I can't tell you how many times I was expected, as a trainer, with a big barn full of horses, to take every horse in the barn, no matter what level it was, to horse shows. And people just expected you to do it and try to make it work. Well, I stopped doing that a while back. I mean, I always made it work pretty well, if you will, as I've won Horse of the Year awards at every level except the Grand Prix, and trained many people up into the FEI levels that have won their medals and this sort of things. But we want to get back to that foundation that we're not seeing. I mean, we shouldn't see people like we're seeing Grand Prix riders now, hanging on the mouths of the horses, fighting them in the ring, horses overpressed, people spurring horses so their blood's running down their sides. Some of our top riders in the last year, and even what we saw with the FEI last year, which I've been talking about this for a while, that people have to understand that, people whose motivation has not been so much the welfare of the horse, these kind of people have gotten into the sport. For instance, last year, the president of the FEI had, after the last World Cup, had to resign because her husband got caught drugging a horse at the World Equestrian Games. I mean, and this woman was the president, and, how did she become the president of the FEI, because she's Princess so-and-so. Well, now she's living in hiding from her husband, who I guess is, I don't know what's going on there. But once again, this is what I'm talking about, how these elements have crept into the people running the sport. In America, a lot of the people, if you look at who's on all these boards, it's all breeders, because they want to keep dressage the way it is so they can sell young horses quickly. They can put them into phony frames and sell them for a lot of money. And 2 years later, they're lame and the person's buying another one. And this is what we've seen so many of our equestrian sports turn into. And this is, once again, what we want to get back to with the World Dressage Federation. Now, getting back to your question of how we're launching it, the websites are almost done. So I have completed the first levels of the dressage test. And I've asked for people on our fans and followers site to send me in sample tests. So many of my associate trainers and their students are now riding through the test, and I'm scoring them and doing extensive voiceover, like how I do it. I let you see the test first without me saying anything, and then I talk you through everything I'm seeing, and then I score the test for you, and through even all the marks at the end of the test and that sort of thing. So you can see exactly. So I'm doing lots of those. I've done about 10 of them so far, and we'll be doing lots of those, and those will all be on the website. But for anybody interested in joining our fans and followers site there, and that's where I am posting them right now. But all these are going to be, we are creating a whole educational library for the World Dressage Federation. So all those educational videos that we produce will be available free of charge and that sort of thing, as I'm doing one on the scoring. And one of the biggest things I'll point out that I think is going to make the biggest difference about all of this is I have created a new scoring system, if you will. So the scoring system in the past was that you had each movement had a possibility of 10 points, correct, in each box, right? And some of them have 2. But the problem was, like when I first started riding in dressage, we used to consider that, if you didn't break 50%, that you weren't ready to be in a class and you should go back a class kind of thing. But what we've seen in the last few years, and I remember this started in the 90s, and I remember being in a show office and someone coming into the office and yelling at the person who put on the show, which was me, that the judge had written something bad on their test. Like they had no idea that the judge was there. What? And I said, well, what do you think the judge is just going to write nothing? The point is, what we used to think about is you never had to write anything on the test if the score was at least 5%. We used to think the judges had to write something if it was below, because we considered a 5 as being sufficient. And if you didn't score a 5, then the judge was to clarify why you didn't at least get a 5. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes.
So this became a very vague thing. So as people started riding, as I said 30 years ago in dressage, if you rode in on a hollow horse or an over tense horse or an over flexed horse, you would get a 20% or a 30% or get laughed out of the ring, or in some cases they would ring the bell. I said I couldn't believe how many lame horses I saw at the last Olympic Games that no one was ringing the bell. I mean, the horse that won in the dressage was dead lame in the first test it rode. It couldn't even flex its right hock at all. 20 years ago, the bell would have been rung and the girl would have been out. Now she comes back the next day and the horse was miraculously sound. Well, how do you think it was miraculously sound? I can't say this for sure, but I know I've seen this myself at many horse shows. What people don't realize today is that joint injections are legal drugging. This is how they're getting by. A veterinarian can come to your horse show and shoot painkiller, and this hyaluronic acid directly into your horse's joint, and it's legal for them to do it. Well, people don't even realize what it is. It's nothing but painkiller and inflammation reducer being shot directly into the horse's joint. And any person, if you've talked to any doctors who talk about these things, they will tell you, like with humans, I was just talking to a human doctor, they say you're not allowed legally to inject any joint on a human being in America more than 3 times, or because it will destroy the joint. And that's what's happening to all these horses in dressage today. They're being kept going on these joint injections that the veterinarians have sadly convinced them that this is a cure. They are not a cure at all, folks. They're nothing but legal drugging. So this is the kind of stuff we've seen going on and what we want to get away from. So getting back to my point about the scoring and how it's working. So the way I have to clear this out, to clarify this, our judges have to know that that the horse is working correctly over its back. So if we talk about every score has a possibility of 10 points, right, that you can accumulate. The first point that you get is for whether the horse is working over its back or not. For instance, in the test, they call for a working trot, right? You know that term,
Yes.
right? Working trot. Most people today don't understand what it means. They think it's the same thing as any other trot. Working trot means working over the back. A horse that's hollow is not in a working trot. And therefore, you are not doing the movement that the test is asking for, and you should get a 0 on the movement. With the scoring system as it stands now, it's this vague idea about, it's not really clarified to the judges, or from the judges, what that is. In other words, why did this person get a 7? If the horse is hollow and flipping its front legs out, it's not in a working trot, so it should be a 0. So my point being, and this element is what will allow people to train all kinds of different horses and be judged on the same criteria. Because, if you come out, you can be on the most $1 million horse in the world, but if it's going hollow, you're going to get a 0 on every movement because you're not actually doing what it is being asked for. So in this way, we get back to the foundation. We get the foundation of dressage and what it was supposed to be about back into the sport and back into our competitions. Now, just to give you the rest of my scoring system. So the first point you get is for whether the horse is working over its back again. Now, the next section, you have 3 points possible for rhythm. And you can think of it this way. A horse losing rhythm at times, 1. A horse in good, steady rhythm, 2. A horse in perfect rhythm that we could call cadence, you would get a 3. Relaxation, same thing. A horse not completely relaxed, 1. A horse not steady, but not completely relaxed, a 2. Horse completely relaxed and in the zone, you'd get a 3. So that's how you can make up your difference. So if you think about it this way, if you come into the ring with a horse that's over its back, and even if I'm sorry, I forgot the last element of that, which is accuracy in the ring, which is your ring craft. So you have 3 points possible for that. So once again, if you come in and the horse is working over its back. And if you want to look at it this way, you have a fairly sloppy ride with a fairly sloppy rhythm, fairly sloppy relaxation, and fairly sloppy direction, you could still get a 4, but I think, with deductions for anything that would be extreme, in other words, a sudden loss of motion or something like that, coming completely off the bridle, in the normal way that we used to think about it, the 1 or 2 point reduction there. But getting back to this idea of the horses being able to recognize whether horses are doing what we conceive of. And the rules in dressage have not changed. Last year, I had a woman come to one of our clinics, and she had just graduated from the USDF judges program, paid a lot of money to go through the program. And she said, Will, I want you to know that during the program, everything that we learned for the weeks of the class was exactly what you say. And after we got to the end of the class and we had graduated, they took us all into a room, and this is at the USDF, set them all down and said, what we have to tell you now, however, is that if you judge correctly and judge the way we have taught you, you will never be hired. So even at the USDF, they're telling the judges this. They know this. So the only judges anymore who get hired are the ones who will hand out these ridiculous scores where people are getting these 90% scores and even coming in. I mean, I've seen scores that were in the 70s and 80s that were absurd. I mean, that were laughable tests, but they were on $1 million horse or $500,000 or whatever the case may be, or in some cases $4 million horses or 10 million, as we saw with that Totalist horse, which I'm happy about. I feel very sorry for that horse, but I think it was part of the turning point that people started looking at dressage in a different way. When suddenly we have a dressage horse selling for, what was it, $32 million or something like that in American US dollars. I mean, this is absurd. And what did they get for that $32 million? I think they went to 5 horse shows and finally retired the horse because it was probably lame when they bought it, But anyway, you get that idea. So this is the idea with the scoring system and getting judges who will stand by their scores and who can recognize that horses are actually in the gaits that are actually called for in the test, and not this, as I said, getting back to when this change happened, when people started being able to afford these very expensive dressage horses, and I'm going back all the way to the 70s when this whole imported horse thing began. And, before that, we had thoroughbreds, we had quarter horses, we had Arabs, and we had, various range horses, and we had Lipizzaners, and that's what people had to ride dressage. My first dressage horses were all thoroughbreds because I grew up in Kentucky, and that's what we did. Fox hunting horses, hunters, and jumpers were all thoroughbreds before anybody heard of these warbloods, right? But so the breeding kind of made it, it's like we've seen in the jumper world today. Most of these horses we see in the jumper world today, if they were trained well, they'd be jumping, 2 feet higher than they are jumping, and they would be lasting for 20 years. Like, to me, the ideal horseman is the person who can compete and keep their horse sound for the longest time. Like Marcus Enning, after the last Olympics, retired his horse that he'd been showing for 20 years at Grand Prix. To me, that's a real horseman. I mean, anybody can just buy, like buying cars. You just buy another one, and this one wears out. Like I used to say about, they would give cars to people maybe who weren't so educated, and they just drive them until, the oil ran out and blow up, and they'd go buy another one, right? And that's the mentality that we saw creep into the horse world, and that's what we're hoping, once again, to bring back a sport with the World Dressage Federation that will be accessible to everybody with a lot of educational things. Now, a lot of people, I don't want people also to think that, because I have art to ride, and I have a lot of clients, I have a lot of trainers, and I teach a lot of people, but it isn't just about this. I mean, about me. I want the World Dressage Federation is much more, it's open to anybody who wants to ride correctly and trains correctly. So it's not about, you don't need to be an art to ride person. This is one thing I want to emphasize, that, anybody who wants to ride correctly and follow correct principles in their horse and develop them that way will be able to find an outlet for what they do, instead of, in so many cases, I've seen people have beautiful rides on horses that went perfectly well and get, beat by a landslide by somebody riding an upside down horse because everybody knew that client paid $500,000 for that horse, and that's how it all works and what we want to get away from. So does that all make sense?
It does. It does. Bringing people in and you've got a couple of tests and walk, that really appeals to a wide audience. There are people around that say, I just want to walk. They might give the horse the exercise, do some trot canter, on the lunge, do whatever. And it often happens when people are older, returning to riding, or people have an injury, or they've lost confidence, and just young green horses. I'll just walk through this test and, give the horse a good experience dismounting in the ring. So you're really appealing to a wide audience. If someone said to you, what is the World Dressage Federation, just as a description, I know on your page, and I don't know if we're supposed to do it because you haven't actually launched yet, but it is World Dressage Federation. And you talk about the organisation, but can you just talk a little bit, just summarise the mission and the beliefs about the, classical foundation training and just summarise that, what World Dressage Federation is, if people aren't going to your page at the moment?
Well, the World Dressage Federation, the idea of it, its goal is to bring correct foundational training back into dressage work through all of the levels and bring back, the principles that people like me grew up with. I mean, as I say, I feel very sorry. Most people, if you learn how to ride, unless you were with somebody exceptional, and they're few and far between, in the last 30 years, we have 3 generations of young people who have grown up thinking and being told, and even by the sport itself and the officials in the sport, that you ride a horse by hanging onto its mouth and pulling its head back at you and holding onto it for dear life, and trying to force it through these movements. And this is what we want to get away from. So our goal is to bring back correct classical foundational training.
So, Will, why now? I can understand that you're frustrated and you can see things, but is it in particular because, about the whole delivery, because I'd like you to talk about that and how people can do this online, perfect for people caught in COVID and not wanting to travel their horses or not able to in some places. Is that why it is now, or was it just timely that, you were getting to the stage where you were just a bit frustrated and you said, right, I'm going to do something about this?
Well, I've actually been talking about this for quite a number of years now, and the works for this have actually been in the works for about 3 years. But part of why, I would just say why, because I suddenly have the time, I'm home. I mean, over the last 5 years, I've been traveling the world kind of nonstop. So because of the COVID-19, I've been trying to get this done for a long time, but my schedule is just so insane that I just wasn't getting it done. So with this lockdown that we've had, it's really been allowing me to take advantage of that and move forward. The websites now for the World Dressage Federation are almost finished. I would say they would be launched within the month, let's say. And our first horse show we're shooting for, I'm talking about horse show, online horse show, will be September, I think, is the first one that will be where people, and once again, the idea is that you'll have a time block. You will be expected to have a date stamp, and you'll have like a window. There'll be a 2-week window or a 1-month window for you to videotape yourself. And the video has to be continuous, so there can't be editing in it, that sort of thing. And as a way of get starting. So it is that. It is timely because I think people are not wanting to travel or can't travel, as well as we're getting, especially for people who, the horse showing thing has become so ridiculously expensive. I have no idea what it's like where you are, but I'm sure it's very expensive. Here in the United States, just to go to a little dressage show and go in a couple of classes is going to cost you $1,000 for the day by the time it's over with, so it's become extremely expensive for people. And then there's, just that thing of haggling with the dangers of traveling. I mean, I spent 40 years of my life traveling with horses all up and down the East Coast, across the United States, and this sort of thing. And quite frankly, if I never had to put another horse in another trailer, I would be happy. I was happy that I walked away from, and my horses walked away from difficulties. Like someone was driving one of my trucks, and the trailer came off and flipped over on the freeway with horses in it. And amazingly, all those horses walked away from that. But I've walked away from sort of many of those things and go, gee, if I never had to put a horse in another trailer, you know what I'm saying? I would be happy having seen of that for so many years. And, I don't expect it to happen, but the point is, it's very nice to be able to show from home, and that's the idea, is the timing and the expense. I think we have, as Peter Horobin, the great Australian saddle maker, said to me not long ago, he said, there's a lot more people who just have a horse and want to enjoy it. He said, I don't care if the wealthiest people buy my saddles, because there's a lot more of these people who just have a good horse and they care about them and they want to do it right. So I think that it's that mentality that we want to get back to and give people an opportunity to do something, and that camaraderie. If people join our Facebook sites, for instance, and now there will be, I haven't put it up yet, but there will be a Facebook site that's just for the World Dressage Federation, because I do, once again, I want other trainers who aren't involved with me. I mean, I don't consider myself, I see lots of people who are doing lots of things along these lines. I was just contacted last week by one of your Australian judges, actually, who had heard the previous podcast. His name is Peter Shaw, a lovely man who we've spoken a few times on the phone since last week. And he's a 3-day event judge. And he had heard me talking about, how much I think the 3-day event riders are doing better than the dressage riders. I see better dressage at 3-day, and that was always not the case. I mean, for years, the dressage that you saw at the 3-day events was pretty bad in many cases, except for those few exceptional people like, Mark Todd from New Zealand over there. And there were always a few, but, now, as I'm saying, what I was saying in my last podcast with you is that I see better dressage riding going on in the 3-day eventing than I see in the so-called pure dressage ring. So anyway, this is what we're doing. And I'm hoping to have a Facebook site and bring many people who just all have the same idea. They said, I'm not the only person who wants to see this happen, and I think there's lots of people who have been frustrated by it, who have just kind of thrown up their hands. Like, I spent years just doing my own thing of, being a trainer for very wealthy people, only doing their horses, never leaving their estate or whatever the case may be, because just doing my thing and taking their horses to horse shows. But it just got to be very lonely. I want to get back to enjoying the horses with my friends again, like I did growing up and fox hunting and all that kind of thing, which I still believe, like Henry Wynne-Malan, the great trainer for the Queen of England for so many years, and Grand Prix gold medalist, and him talking about how he could never consider a horse being correctly trained if it could go Grand Prix, but you couldn't fox on it. Well, it wasn't a trained horse. And I kind of grew up with that mentality of people that this was just something that is part of correct training. But a good racing trainer knows how to work horses over their backs and not kill them in the process, And whether you're jumpers or Western, whatever the case may be, it's all the same. Horses are either moving over their backs and protecting their joints, or they're being ridden hollow and their joints are being destroyed. It's as simple as that, in every sport, And even that idea that you can't overdo things, that's one of the things I would limit. And now we will ultimately start to have live shows as well, but we are starting off with these. We're going to have 4 online shows a year, as I said. As the need comes and the interest is there, we will start having horses, and of course when we can again, and we're still not sure when that's going to be. But so I think the timing is right on all these levels, and so that's, and once again, the COVID-19 has given me the time to actually be home and have the time to actually put all this together, because it's an enormous task, and to do it all. And happily, many of my students and associate trainers.
Just go over the 4 levels again.
Foundation level, so working level, collection level, and then master, which would take you to Grand Prix.
How are they going to differ from the United States Dressage Federation? We've talked about the early ones, the walking, the dismounting, but if you say these ones, how are they different then to the United States Dressage Federation? Because our listeners are thinking, do I get involved here? Do I stay where I am? What do I do? What's different? If you're going to say these tests are different, what's in them that's not in the other tests or different to the other tests?
I think that what I've tried to do is create tests, especially at these lower levels. Now, as they go up in the level and get into collection, they will be much more similar to one another. But for instance, once we get to working level, which is the next level of foundation, they will start traditionally, like you would have said, a first level or second level, third level. I think in the United States at 4th level, start cantering into the ring. But before that, it's trotting. So same kind of thing. So the amount of walk that we do in the levels, going up, but there will always be walk. I don't know if you know about this, but in the last few years, there's been a big push by Grand Prix riders. They want to take walk out of Grand Prix. Now, they want to take it out because you can clearly see when horses are badly trained, where you see it more than, especially the uneducated eye, you see it in the walk, because you see how lateral these horses walk and how hollow they are. That's what happens when you hollow a horse's back. It becomes very lateral in its walk. It starts walking like a camel. And so many of these upper-level dressage horses, that's how they walk, and they want to get that taken out. So I never want to to dumb everything down. And that's that's the biggest problem. It's not that things are going to be so different here, but with this scoring system, the way I have devised it, you can't come in and ride a horse upside down and still walk out with a 50 or 60% test. It's not going to happen. You're going to get, if the horse isn't in a working trot, you're going to get a 0 on every movement. And as I said, that's what led to, it gave too much leeway in the subjectivity of what dressage was to end us up to where we are now. I mean, I'll give you an example. My horse that I won my silver medal on, I was horse of the year at 4th level on him. I was horse of the year at Priest St. George on him, and I was horse of the year at Intermediaire on the horse. When to get my silver medal, which is 4 scores, 2 scores at 4th level, 2 scores at Priest St. George, above 60%, right? So my horse won. I was the winning horse in my region. Okay, so I was the regional champion, and it took me 2 years to get 4 scores of 60%. That's how hard it used to be. So I'm not somebody that's somebody who was winning. I mean, my horse was the winningest horse in the region, if that makes sense. So this is why all these things, when I got my silver medal, there were probably 10 people in America that had one. Now they hand them out like candy because the scores, are handed out. Unless you come in the ring and just totally fall on your head or something, you get in these upper levels in America anyway. People are walking out, in other words, a really bad test is still getting a 75%, which is, when again, you see my point is, so now everybody has silver medals, everybody has gold medals. You go and buy yourself a upside down, old Priest St. George dressage horse or Grand Prix horse, and you ride it through 3 tests, and now you're a gold medalist. So the medals don't even mean anything to me anymore. I mean, and it was very important to me 30 years ago when I was trying to get them, because it was important, and it meant something to me as a professional. Now to me it means nothing. I hardly even tell people that I have it because it's not a meaningful thing. So this is, once again, what people can expect is fairness. I want to get back to fairness and camaraderie in the sport, and where we're all enjoying it, and the horses are enjoying it, and that's what we're rewarding, not just the fact that I see so much of the horse world today has just, if you will excuse them, it's turned into a silly parade of wealth. Whoever can afford, like, saw the guy, who was running for president, Mitt Romney, here over the United States, and why he's running for president. He's bought some, $1 million Grand Prix horse that he's got somebody showing it. And it's like, what does that mean? All that means is that you've got $1 million to throw away. And did the guy get anywhere on the horse? No. He didn't come in. A year later, the horse was gone. Another $1 million thrown away. I go back, the horse that, this horse named Kennedy was bought for this rider over here in America who had been for the Olympics 6 times and embarrassed America 6 times in the show ring. They bought him that horse. Kennedy was ranked 4th in the world when they bought it for him to ride at the next Olympic Games. He came in like 16th or something. But it was kind of an awakening moment, people. You see, this person that you thought was one of the greatest trainers in America, who's done this over and over again and destroys every horse he's ever taken to the Olympic Games, is gone within months of that. You never see them again. They go to the Olympic Games with him and they're gone from history, because they're fried. Their brains are completely fried, So anyway, this is what we want to get back to.
Yeah. So the whole, I understand the fairness, camaraderie, bringing back the correct classical foundation training. What about goals for the Federation? We've sort of got the overview, but where do you see this going? Do you think that it will get adopted by the FEI? What are we working towards? Is this saying this is the correct training you should be doing before you get to the FEI levels? So it's like an alternate to get to those levels?
Right. I mean, if you go and read, for instance, the actual printed German, for instance, the German handbook of dressage from the German Federation, right? It says everything that I say in it. If you read, now I haven't read the American rules. I don't know if they've just stripped everything out of it, but same thing in the American horse show stadium. I mean, for instance, a hunter in America, do you know what American hunters are? They're show ring hunter horses, they used to be described exactly as a first level dressage horse in the rule book. This is what they were supposed to be. They were supposed to be swinging over their backs freely and swinging through. Now, unfortunately, what happened in the hunter world is they started teaching this way of jumping. I'm sure you've seen it, where the kids are taught to lay down on the neck of the horse and they hold onto the mane with their necks way up the horse's mane, and they literally lay on the neck of the horse. Well, if a horse is jumping over its back and you jump in that manner, it'll jump you right out of the saddle. You literally ran up on your head. And many kids and many I have known many adults who've gone over to America, people that I've seen them ride, and they're telling me that they're going to Europe to buy horses. The next thing they come back and they're in a sling or they're in a wheelchair because they got on a horse that wasn't jumping flat. So same what happened in America jumping with the hunter horses. They started letting them jump flat because if you can't jump on the neck of the horse and jump a horse that's going to jump over its back because you're too far forward in the motion, so it just pitches you right off. So that's what we had happen here in America. So all these jumping horses started being taught to be flat jumpers. If you notice how many of them, they run them to the base of the fences and then they climb up the fences and they get by with that because of how talented these horses are today. I mean, the average jumping horse, today, these warm bloods, especially if you buy them from Holland, where they jump these ditches from the day they're born. And that's what I used to go to Holland and buy a lot of horses. And one of the breeders there was telling me, he said, well, this is why these horses jump from the day they're born. They're jumping 12-foot dikes. And he said, guess what? The ones that can't jump drown, and that's what happens to them. And that's why they've become, many Dutch horses that I've had. In fact, the horse that I won my silver medal on was a horse that was given to me because it was going to be put to sleep. But you couldn't put it in anything. It would jump out of any fence that you put it into because it just didn't care. And that's how these horses are. They'll jump anything you put them in front of. If they were round and over their jumping over their backs, they would be jumping 7 feet and they'd be doing it regularly for years. But they just ride them hollow because they can jump so well. It's kind of like a dog that's been, like if you buy a golden retriever, right? They just fetch sticks. You don't have to teach them to do it. That's how these jumping horses are today. The best ones just jump what you put them in front of until they have a wreck, and then they don't anymore. But they get by on the athleticism of the animals instead of having to train them. I mean, back in the old days, if you trained a thoroughbred to jump, you had to know what you were doing because thoroughbreds, I can tell you how many thoroughbreds I've had get loose in a dressage arena. They won't jump out of a dressage arena because it's not a natural thing for them to do. They'll just go around and around the ring, like looking at the rail over there and going, well, it's only 1 foot high, but I'm not going to jump over it. So, and the fact that you can take most thoroughbreds, you could teach them to jump. I've never had a thoroughbred that I taught to jump that jumped out of fields. Almost every jumping European, especially Dutch horse I've ever had, if they're jumping horses, they jump in the arena, you put them out in the field, they'll just jump right over the fence. And just come back to wherever they want to go, So this is what's happened, So people are just buying up these horses. They jump them for a year or two, get by, and throw them away and get another one, Which is really sad because they're actually missing. They're missing what judging. I was always under the impression that learning to ride should make you a better person, And that's what I see missing. I don't see people becoming better people because they ride anymore. I see them becoming obnoxious brats, who sit and scream at a horse, Daddy, I have to have another one. This one didn't win. Buy me another one, And this is the kind, I remember, I'm sure you remember that too. The Queen of England having, when Princess Anne were kids, I doubt if the kids do it anymore, but I remember, her out there mucking out her own stalls and they were expected. That's how I was. I mean, I grew up on a farm with 100 horses, but I could have any of them that I wanted. But if I decided they were mine, I had to take care of them. I had to clean them. I had to clean up after them, and do everything involved with them. So, I didn't get 10. I could have had 10 if I wanted, but I only took, the ones that I wanted to actually put that much work into, so which I think should be part of it. So, getting back to that, making riding to the point backward, it actually is making people be better people. If you will. We have to control ourselves.
If people want to get involved, the Facebook page, if they go to Art to Ride now, but then when you've got the Facebook page for World Dressage Federation, I imagine you're going to let everyone know on the Art to Ride Facebook page, and then they can go across to the World Dressage Federation. Is that the best way to get involved now?
Yes, it is. Well, as I said, for right now, the best thing to do would be to get on the Art to Ride pages on Facebook. For instance, there's one in Australia, but the best one to go to is the fans and followers, because that's the one that I do all the communicating with everybody and comment on, and everybody can put up, I have something like 40 associate trainers around the world. Anybody can put a question on that, a video. The idea is that's part of my associate trainers, system of them learning is they have to get on there. I expect them to answer people's questions and put up videos themselves teaching. So everybody has an outline. If you don't have a dime to your name but own a horse, you can get on these Facebook pages, and you have trainers around the world who will help you solve your problems and put you in the right direction and answer any question that you have. And that's what I'd like to see happen on the World Dressage Federation page as well, and when we get to that.
Okay. And then, because all those details, we can update them, just send them through, and we'll put them at the bottom of your chat, just on the bottom of the page, we'll put all those contact details. But if people now, if someone says, look, I'm already a trainer, I'm already a trainer in my own right, I'm already doing well, I've got a lot of students. If they want to be a judge, how do they go ahead? Is it your current associates that are judges, or if they're already judging, or they'd like to become a judge, what's the best way for that?
Right now, the best way is to go through an associate trainer program. But my associate trainer program is not it's not one of these things where you're paying thousands of dollars. I mean, people send me a video showing themselves training, showing themselves teaching, and I'm willing to promote anybody who I think is training correctly. Once again, you don't have to be my student. There's plenty of people out there in the world who know this stuff. And I think many who've just been waiting for the opportunity to come back, and because I know I'm not the only frustrated older person that's been around long enough to have known the difference. So by all means, I want, once again, ultimately, this will not be about me or about my group or anybody. And anybody who thinks they have the knowledge and they want to get in touch with me is certainly welcome to do so. For instance, I'm talking to other people. I would like to get a few other people on the board now who are already recognized judges around the world. I'm talking to a few of those people now about coming on board as board members, to help promote this thing. Because my idea is just like Lowell Boomer did with the original USDF, is that my goal is this will be something that I will pass on to the world when it's going. I would turn it over to be its own entity, irregardless of me. Is what my goal is. I hope that it will be around long after I'm gone. And we have ideas. The idea ultimately would be also to bring in a jumping element into this as well. I would love to see jumping classes that get back to correct foundational jumping training, and I've come up with some ideas about that, which is a very simple one. For instance, for judging, I think that jumping hollow should be considered a dangerous jump. 3 dangerous jumps and you're eliminated. In other words, right now, unfortunately, as long as you get over the fence in jumping, and that's what's led jumping. When I was young, most jumper people started riding hunters and jumpers, and they learned to ride, the lower levels of jumping as a hunter rider. And then those people who were willing to do the work to learn the dressage and the more collection necessary to really ride jumpers, would go on to that. So bringing in this element that we could have jumper classes, and with that being for everyone's safety. I don't know if you guys are aware. I know the last time I was in Australia, another one of your young 3-day event riders had gotten killed. If you look at the number of people dying jumping right now, people should be shocked. People should be shocked going to jumper shows today and watching kids being carted off left and right, and no one's saying a word about the fact that these kids are being put on horses that are jumping hollow, being forced into the ring. I watched a class a year or so ago that I was short shower at, where 3 kids went, 4 kids from one class went into the one kid and no one said a word about this, couldn't get the horse into the ring. Her trainer comes down and whips the horse in front of the judges, could see it going on, whips the horse in sort of aisle leading to the ring, whips it into the ring. And of course, to me, that should have been eliminated right then and there. The horse comes up completely hollow to the first fence, crashes through the fence. The horse, I don't know how damaged that kid was, but it was unconscious when it left, or she left. But this is the kind of thing that should be shocking to people. It should be shocking that 10 professional 3-day event riders a year are dying. I was a top 3-day event trainer on the West Coast here in America for 10 years. No one ever died. Now we've gotten used to the idea that 6 to 10 people every year are dying 3-day eventing. Well, there's something wrong with that, right? That if you had, if 10 drivers at the NASCAR died in a year, people would be up in arms. They would be going, what's going on here? But this horse thing is kind of, I think everybody, because it's kind of off in its own world now. I mean, the general public really doesn't pay any attention to the horse world anymore, which is getting back to that idea that we talked about what happened before World War II, which is that point I was getting to. I think I got cut off when we were talking about. But that idea is that most people today don't realize almost every horse in the world was eaten during World War II. That when at the end of World War II, there were hardly any horses left in Europe or America. They had all been eaten. Halfway through World War II, we closed down the Fort Riley, Kansas, the cavalry depot, and they butchered 10,000 horses to send them to America. That was the whole thing about, Patton saving the white horses. They were about to be cut up to be food for the troops. So it wasn't for 20 years. The horse business didn't come back for 20 years. It wasn't until the early 60s that we started to see horse shows again. Before World War II, horses were the number one spectator in sport in the world. Polo was the number one spectator sport in the world. And most people don't have any idea of that, right, today. They don't realize that during that 20 years, we lost all of those great trainers and all of those schools, even places like the Spanish Riding School, which I went to in 1976 to spend a couple of weeks riding there and observing. And I walked away from there, and I don't mind saying it, in absolute disgust. I got to see the training sessions that went on, that the public didn't see. We sit there in the stands and we're just appalled at people, these whipping horses. They would take the stallions into the corners of the ring, 3 guys with whips, and just whip the hell out of them, trying to make them pee off. So they don't realize that all these things that, like Spanish Riding School still has this it still talks the big game, and puts out the fancy books. And there have been, and I would say that Arthur Cotis, when I was there, he's about the same age as me. And he was the only one that when we saw the quadrilles, and he was leading the quadrille then, he was only in his 20s, and his horses looked good. And as you went back in the line, by the time you got to the 6th horse, they were basically limping around lame, but they were doing this all for the public. And people don't realize that things like the Spanish Riding School just turned into a tourist attraction, which is basically what it's run as now, even though they still, they talk the talk. But I don't think the walk is going on much there anymore. So, but once again, it's because of how much they lost in that 20-year period after World War II. Once again, when all this just it all kind of went away, if you will, and the public interest in it, in a way. So, we're now at this point where the public interest has come back, but in a way that, this gets to a point where not everybody who shows can afford it. Lots of people who have horses can afford to have horses and can afford to ride them and train them correctly and take care of them. But, with the astronomical fees at horse shows and what it costs to ship horses and what you would have to spend to actually compete nationally, and win points and all that kind of thing, it's really that's become out of the zone for most people that ride horses these days.
Yeah. Well, I just think the knowledge that you've got and the ideas you've got are just extraordinary. I think, we'd certainly love to keep chatting. We've already had you on once, and I know your time's valuable. This is for our listeners too. If you're looking for, the way I see it, and correct me if I'm wrong, if you're thinking, I'd like to do FEI, but I want an alternate way that's not as expensive, that is, it is correct training to bring my horse up, because, people want to do the right thing. Whether they're doing the right thing or the wrong thing, they really want to do the right thing. And the other thing is too, I like the way that you've really expanded and said, right, if you're just comfortable with walking, that's what you're doing. Give your horse a good experience, dismount in the ring. So sort of all the way through, you're thinking of the horse, you're thinking of the rider, you're thinking of the correct training, and the fact that it's online, you're setting it all up, you've got the levels, you've got the tests to go through to check, you're getting the feedback, and the whole system of having, looking at more judges. I just think, wow, this is a really good training idea. So I would urge people to join the Art to Ride Facebook page, the fans and followers page, and start to look at these tests and submitting it. And just being able to do it online, I think, is just wonderful. So, Will, I've got to say thanks for coming on. I'd love to talk to you again and see how you catch up and see how we're going. Certainly look forward to your next chat. Really happy, Will. So
always enjoy talking to you.
All right, well, look, good to talk to you. And if you'd like those contact details, they'll be at the bottom of Will's page, which will be horsechats.com. His name, Faerber, it's a bit hard, but I think if you go to horsechats.com and search for Will or William, you'll find that it's Faerber if you're interested. Otherwise, just go there. Even if you search for World Dressage Federation, you'll find those details. So thanks, Will, and hope to catch up again soon.
You're welcome.
Okay, bye-bye.
Excellent. Look forward to talking to you then. Thank you so much. Bye.
If you've enjoyed this chat, then please comment, rate and subscribe. If you'd like any changes or recommendations for guests, then please contact us through horsechats.com. And while you're online, have a look at the government-accredited courses at internationalhorsecollege.com. Registered Training Organisation 31352.
Remember that our comments and instructions are general in nature and do not take into consideration your individual horses or your individual ability and circumstances. If you enjoyed this podcast, then please leave your comment below.